Picture this. It's Poznan in the mid-1990s. The city is caught right in the throes of this incredibly violent, chaotic transition. On the one hand, you've got a rapidly modernizing hub, famous for its international fairs and academic prestige, but right alongside that, you have a sprawling landscape of gray concrete estates and these dimly lit, sprawling parks. And it was within this exact chaos that a completely new kind of fear was born. The residents honestly had no idea that a highly methodical predator was just walking their streets, a guy who by day was just an ordinary physical worker, but by night transformed into a totally calculated hunter. So today in this explainer, we're opening up the dark files of Zygmunt C, the killer who tested a flawed system at its absolute weakest point.
But before we get into the cold, hard criminology of it all, we really need to ground this in the heartbreaking reality of what actually happened. The words here are from Stanislaw, the father of the very first victim, Marta K. In the autumn of 1993, 24-year-old Marta, an economics student, was found dead near one of the city's main arteries, her library notes just scattered all around her. And incredibly, the authorities initially dismissed it as a non-suspicious death. It was a fatal, absolutely tragic error, because that 5-minute walk home became the terrifying starting point of a nightmare that would last for years.
You see, the transition away from communist-era urban planning left behind what experts refer to as dead zones. We're talking specifically about the areas between the massive block estates of the Winogrady and Piatkowo districts. These were poor-lit, labyrinth-like spaces full of concrete and sparse, unkempt greenery. For your average citizen, they were just, an uncomfortable shortcut home in the dark. But for our subject, they were a perfect, natural hunting ground.
Section 1. A City in Shadows.
Let's walk through the timeline, because the sheer span of time here is crucial to understanding the failure. We're looking at 5 young, solitary women, all murdered on their way home over the course of nearly 4 years. After Marta K. in 93 came Joanna P., a 27-year-old nurse who was just taking a shortcut through a park after a night shift. Then Helena in 94, Beata in 95, and 23-year-old Natalia in 96, who was actually engaged to be married. Every single one of them was attacked when they were totally alone, and the killer just operated with absolute impunity, year after year.
Section 2. Hunting in Dead Zones.
Zygmunt C wasn't just some chaotic madman acting on impulse. Not at all. He was highly organized using this terrifyingly simple 6-step formula. For steps 1 and 2, he'd meticulously select and observe women who were alone, maybe looking tired or distracted, in those unmonitored dead zones. Steps 3 and 4, he'd approach completely silently from behind, relying on total surprise. And finally, steps 5 and 6, he would conceal the bodies just enough, maybe in nearby bushes or an abandoned structure, just to delay discovery. And then, he'd simply walk away and blend right back into the city. To put this in perspective, Poland had definitely seen its share of terrible serial killers historically. You had Bogdan Arnold, who strangled his victims, sure, but he did it indoors, in the privacy of his own apartment. Then you had Paweł Tuklin, the Scorpion, who hunted outdoors, but he used a hammer. Zygmunt C essentially combined the most terrifying elements of both guys. He took that highly personal, brutal method of manual strangulation and executed it entirely outdoors, out in public. He basically turned the public parks of Poznan into his own private hunting lodge.
Section 3. The Anatomy of Strangulation.
Okay, the physiology behind these attacks is just deeply unsettling. Think about this. It only takes a minimal 2 to 5 kilograms of pressure to close the carotid arteries in a human neck. That is hardly anything. Zygmunt C operated with this intuitive, almost surgical knowledge of human anatomy. By attacking from behind and applying that exact targeted pressure, he induced what's known as a vagus nerve reflex. So he wasn't just overpowering these women, he was literally weaponizing their own biology against them.
And because he possessed that precise anatomical knowledge, the speed of his attacks was just devastating. We're talking about 60 to 90 seconds. That is all it took to induce a rapid loss of consciousness. The victims quite literally had zero time to fight back, let alone scream for help. Actually, the total lack of defensive wounds in many of the cases proves exactly how quickly and overwhelmingly he established total control over his victim's breath.
Section 4. A flawed system. Which really begs the question, right? How did a predator this methodical manage to evade the authorities for nearly 4 years? Well, the 1990s in Poland was a time of absolute, top-to-bottom, systemic chaos. The old communist state police, the Milicja Obywatelska, was being completely dismantled and rebuilt into the modern Polisa.
Because of this massive overhaul, they essentially had no centralized databases. Different district stations handled each murder entirely separately. It was a completely siloed system. One station had Marta's file on a desk, another had Ioana's, and because they couldn't efficiently talk to each other, they completely missed the pattern. Zygmunt C operated right in the middle of that systemic blind spot.
Section 5. The DNA Breakthrough.
It literally wasn't until 1997 that a special task force was finally formed in Poznań to actually look at all these unsolved cases together. And they utilized something that was an absolute rare luxury in 1990s Poland: DNA profiling. When they finally went back and tested the biological evidence, they got an identical genetic match on the bodies of Marta K. and Joanna P. The police were so desperate to catch him at this point, they even took the incredibly bold step of sending female officers in plain clothes into the city parks to act as decoys. Traditional policing had completely missed the dots, but genetic profiling finally connected them.
All of this culminated in his arrest in 1998, and the trial in 1999, it was just incredibly emotional. Imagine a courtroom packed with grieving families facing a man who showed absolutely zero remorse. Natalia's mother actually fainted right there in the courtroom. Marta's father sat in stony silence the entire time until the verdict was read. Ultimately, thanks to the new penal code, Zygmunt C was sentenced to life in prison, which finally put an end to his reign of terror.
Section 6. The Legacy of Fear. Sociologists actually have a term for the lasting impact he left on the city. They call it the geography of fear, or in Polish, geografia strachu. It's this fascinating, terrible phenomenon where terror literally reshapes the daily habits of an entire city. For years, women in Poznań abandoned their evening university classes. They completely stopped walking through the parks. Sales of pepper spray absolutely skyrocketed. The city's public spaces were basically voluntarily surrendered by half the population simply because the fear of the Strangler was just that paralyzing.
So the big takeaway here is really just how much things absolutely had to change. Our cities today are vastly different. We've got ubiquitous CCTV cameras running facial recognition. We have incredibly advanced computerized geoprofiling algorithms, systems like Dragnet and Rigel that can mathematically pinpoint a killer's likely home base. DNA analysis is now a fast, standard procedure, not some rare luxury. And legally, we've established precedents for much harsher sentencing when it comes to predators targeting vulnerable victims. The systemic failures that let Zygmunt C roam free have, for the most part, been engineered right out of modern law enforcement.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought here. Yes, our technology has evolved leaps and bounds. Yes, our police forces are highly interconnected now, but urban planning still creates shadows. In today's highly surveilled world of ubiquitous cameras and instant DNA profiling, are we ever truly safe? Or, if we look closely enough, are there still those who wait patiently in the unlit dead zones of our modern cities? Definitely something to think about the next time you decide to take a shortcut home in the dark.